All right. So we are going to talk about miracles today. How many people had a miracle happen in their life? Anybody not have a miracle happen in their life? All depends on how you define miracle, right? You're going to learn that a lot of my teaching and my learning is all about definitions. My Rosh Hashiva, my rabbi, used to say, without definitions, you got nothing. How can you communicate if you don't know what the words mean, right? So it's a big problem, especially when we're doing Hebrew and we're doing into English, even when we're speaking English to English. I'm watching the news in America. It's like the Tower of Babel. It's really incredible how somebody says one thing and somebody hears exactly like something totally different. It's mind-boggling. And you can watch it from one channel to the next. It's really incredible to see how some politician, I won't mention names, but some politician can say something and, Paul Simon, you hear what you want to hear and you disregard the rest. It's really incredible. So a lot of it has to do with definition. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a deep dive today into the concept of miracles. And miracles is something that is very, it's very near and dear to me because, again, I, as a young adult, when I started studying Torah, it was something that bothered me. It was a barrier, actually, to my studying and my reconnecting with my Judaism, the whole concept of miracles. Because when you go through the Bible and you see seas splitting and sun standing still and man coming from the heavens, and that's their food for 40 years in the desert. And I come from a science background, a mathematics and computers and science background. And that's hard. That's hard. I have to, okay, you're saying all that happened. Okay, that can happen. But why hasn't it happened ever again? We don't see these things happening anymore. How does that work? Like, we had all these miracles in the biblical period, and now we don't seem to have those kind of miracles anymore. So it makes it hard to accept it as being true, right? Coming from a purely scientific background. So on one hand, you can say, okay, that's a test of your faith, right? Just got to accept it as an act of faith. We talked a little bit about that. And remember, we said, what's the Hebrew word for faith? Anybody remember? Remember what we said? There isn't one. There's no word in Lashon HaKodesh for that kind of faith. Accept it as being true, even though you might have your eyes are telling you the opposite and science is telling you the opposite. You accept it anyway as an act of faith, and that's a virtue. This idea doesn't really exist, right? We said that the first of the 10 Commandments was to know that there's a God, not have faith that there's a God, to know that there's a God. So again, got to have a definition. What do you mean by God? And how do I know? What do you mean by know? Is that absolute knowledge, or is it enough knowledge to come to a conclusion in a court of law? We need definitions of our terms. So today, we're going to talk about miracles and see what the Torah really means by a miracle. But more important, what is a miracle? Why do we have miracles? I'm always a big why asker. What do I need that for? What's it doing for me? How's it helping me? What's the miracle all about? So that's what we're going to do. Let me go to our source sheet right now for a minute. Here we go. Yeah, it would be so much easier if a miracle could happen. I had many all along the years when I would have students who say, it would be so much easier to believe if there was just a miracle. Why couldn't he just do a little one for me? Like have my cup float over to the coffee machine and have it pour itself a cup of coffee and float back down to my desk. And a voice comes from heaven and says, there you go, Shmuel. Good going. Learn that Torah. It's me, God. It's true. I'm here. Wouldn't life be so much easier? It would. It would. But the world doesn't work that way for a reason we're going to see in a minute. So we're going to talk about miracles. There are three kinds of miracles. open miracle. Open miracles are the kinds that I explained earlier, the splitting of the sea, man comes from heaven. The laws of physics as we understand them, the world not operating according to the laws of physics as we understand it, and the laws of physics are being suspended. That's called an open miracle. And this is how it's articulated by Nachmanides in his commentary of the Torah. We're going to encounter him a little bit later from the 11th century. Then there's hidden miracle. What's a hidden miracle? A hidden miracle is where we're stretching the laws of coincidence, right? And an example of a hidden miracle would be the Purim story. If you read the book of Esther, you see it's basically a political drama. Everything is happening according to the laws of nature. In fact, it's the only book of the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, where the name of God's not mentioned at all. God is not mentioned once in the entire book of Esther. And you see, eventually everything turns out, right? There's the decree that the Jews are going to be destroyed. Haman is the viceroy. He wants to kill all the Jews in one day. Then they have this lottery, and happens the nice Jewish girl ends the lottery amongst all the Persian beauties, right? It's stretching the odds a little bit. All these series of coincidences and things happen, and ultimately the Jewish people are saved and redeemed. We call that a hidden miracle. If you saw my post today, right? Same thing happened to me in my life. Hidden miracle. My family was saved in the Holocaust. I just posted. We found another. If you didn't notice, or if you're on Facebook and you're not my friend, that's not a good thing. You have to friend me, okay? So friend me. On Facebook, I posted, we discovered descendants of there's 7 different families who were involved in rescuing and saving my family in Holland, hiding from the Nazis. And we just confirmed another one today. Exciting. Mrs. Benneker and her son, Philip. We tracked down, it took us 3 weeks to track down. We found a descendant, also named Philip Benneker. He was like blown away, never knew this story. We let them know, and we just got the letter from Yad Vashem today that Mrs. Benneker and Philip, and I posted on my Facebook page a picture of the people who helped rescue my family. So that's a hidden miracle. Hidden miracle. The laws of nature are stretched. Then the third category of miracle, according to Nachmanides, is what? Nature. I know some of you have been posting grandchildren or great-grandchildren being born, a baby being born. You know what? From a scientific point of view, from an engineering point of view, do you understand what a miracle that is? For a baby to be born? Right? You're on the umbilical cord system, right? We're getting the oxygen through the bloodstream, right? And then all of a sudden, this kid comes out, and all of a sudden, somebody flips a switch. Okay, we switch over to the air-lung system. That is a miracle. But you know what? Happens every minute of every day, and we get used to it, so we call it nature, right? Nature, something that happens that you expect to happen according to the rules, the way God set up the world. We call that nature. But it's a kind of a miracle. God's operating in real time every day, and it's miraculous. So we have open miracle, hidden miracle, and nature. Those are the 3 kinds. Now, I was hoping, didn't get it done in time, I was hoping to get my book republished. Missiles, Masks, and Miracles, about the Gulf War. People remember the Gulf War? You remember General Schwarzkopf. You guys were in America. You had your own approach to the Gulf War. Get that Saddam Hussein, get those weapons of mass destruction. Were there weapons of mass destruction? Were there not weapons of mass destruction? Don't know. But what there were Scud missiles aimed at Israel that Saddam Hussein promised if America attacked Kuwait, to get America out of Kuwait, he was going to destroy us with his missiles. And it took him 3 days. He kept his promise. And during those weeks, Eish Begimel Shvat, from the 3rd day of the 3rd month of Shvat until Purim Adar, 6 weeks later, 39 Scud missiles rained down on us. Now, nobody died. So when you heard CNN and you heard nobody died, 39 missiles, you'd assume, oh, they fell into fields. They were not smart missiles. They were dumb missiles. So you couldn't really aim them properly, right? No big deal. Nobody hurt. Nobody died. No blood, no news. The missiles came in at Mach 9, 9 times the speed of sound. They were worried that there was going to be gas. So they asked us to tape plastic around the windows with packing tape to make a hermetic seal so that if the missile landed and there was gas, we wouldn't get poisoned. So we wore gas masks. Everybody put plastic on their windows, and this is not a direct hit, people. Mach 9, the shock wave from the missile blew the entire street's front windows and walls out. A lot of good that little plastic was going to do, right? Sort of like the face mask and the virus, a little bit. At any rate, and if you thought they were empty, they weren't empty. There were people in these buildings when the missiles landed. Here are some elderly ladies being taken away. Missiles landed, blew out apartments. Nobody seriously injured. Nobody died. This went on for weeks, 39 missiles. After the first couple of weeks, a friend of mine went down and they interviewed people to hear the stories of the miracles. Person went to the bomb shelter, their apartment blew up. Somebody decided they didn't want to go to their bomb shelter. They stayed in their house and their bomb shelter blew up. Miracle after miracle story. So we decided to record it for posterity. Here's my favorite picture. My friend spoke to the cameraman who took this picture. This was in Savillon, and this was a villa. This was a little one-story house. And my friend spoke to the photographer who lived right across the street from this fellow named Mickey. Mickey, when the siren went off, you have about 30 seconds before the missile would land. You didn't have a lot of time to prepare. We were supposed to be warned 8, 10, 12 minutes in advance. We had less than 30 seconds in the end. Mickey sat down on a chair in his living room. He had two lapso ipso, I'm not a dog owner. He had two big dogs seated beside him on either side of the chair. The missile landed, destroyed his house. The entire house fell down on him, killed the two dogs. This is Mickey still sitting in the chair with his head coming out. I can show you other pictures. I didn't post them of the rescue crews when they arrived. It took them 3 hours to get Mickey out because it was like pickup sticks. All this stick and the concrete were leaning at him in a precarious way. If they took it away, it might collapse on him from a different direction and kill him. So it took them 3 hours with the cranes to actually lift the rubble. This is his front door here, right? To lift the rubble away from Mickey. He got up and walked away. But these were the miracles. These were hidden miracles. Hidden miracles. All right. So why? Why do we have miracles? Why not just nature? What do I need a miracle for? So let's put them in the context. We take a look at the big picture. Take a look at the big picture from my rabbi, Ari Khan, from my other rabbi. Let's take a look at the big picture, not get caught up in the details. Miracles in the context of the purpose of creation. What's the purpose of creation? We've said this a number of times already. The Almighty wanted to give of himself to something other than himself. He wanted to, and what's the greatest gift that he could give? He decides to give of himself to something other than himself, which is the godly experience. So he creates a human being, creates people, and he says, okay, I want you to have the greatest gift possible. But we know that it's greater to earn the gift. It's more godlike to earn the gift than it is to get it as a free gift. Because if we get it as free, we're being dependent upon something other than ourselves for the gift. And God is not dependent upon anything else. So if you want to be more godlike, the more independent you become, the more godlike you are, the more you'll be able to relate to God. We don't like to mix religion and politics, right? But in Judaism, there is no difference. Torah is about life, including politics. So if you're going to have a society, if you want a godlike society, you want to empower the individual. The more freedom you give the individual to earn what they merit through their own efforts, the rewards that what they achieve will give them a more godlike experience. All right? So in order to have that, we said before, you need to have opportunity to do the opposite. You need to have the opportunity to ignore God or choose to see God. You can choose to see God in the birth of the baby, or you can chalk it up to nature. That's why he created nature. So you can say, oh, that just happens on its own. It's part of nature. It's not God. It's natural. And the word olam, the word for world, universe, is olam. And it comes from the shorish ne'elam, hidden. The world was created in such a way that God is hidden. The word olam itself testifies to that. Okay, so the prime characteristic of a human being who's there to earn and achieve a relationship with God is free will. Free will doesn't mean the ability to choose between vanilla and chocolate. Free will means when I see the baby born, I choose to see God's hand in it or not. When I see the miracles of the Gulf War, I choose to see God's invisible hand protecting the nation of Israel, or I choose to see great soldiers and Patriot missile batteries armed by American soldiers and bad aim by Saddam Hussein. I choose to see God. I choose not to see God. That's what free choice means, bechira. It means I elect God or I don't elect God. So that has to be protected at all costs. So if that's true, right, that's a prime principle. We want to use principles. My goal is to give you principles so you can understand how the world works and how God works and answer your own questions instead of having to go to rabbis and ask them questions, right? So if that's true, what happens when you have an open miracle? When that coffee comes in and just starts floating into the scene and said, here you go, Shmuel, without a hand, you know what I mean? It's like, just starts floating in. Whoa, have a drink of water, Shmuel. What happens at that point? Do I have the ability to ignore God? Can't chalk that one up to nature. That's God. So if I was thinking about skipping my afternoon prayers, it's a lot harder to choose to skip my afternoon prayers to talk to God when he asked me to do it. After that happens. So you have to realize when an open miracle happens to us, what's it going to do? It's going to change what I choose to do during the day. It's going to change my life, right? Once the open miracle happens to me, can I choose to ignore God? It's very hard to choose to ignore God when the open miracle happens to you. You appreciate that? It's hard to do it with the story of Esther. It's easier than an open miracle, but it's harder than just nature. When the odds start getting stretched, it gets your attention, right? So now I want to skip ahead. I want to show you what the word for miracle really means. There you go. See these guys? This is World War I, British soldiers. They're learning how to use semaphores. They're waving the banner, right? So you know what that little banner is called that they're waving, these guys? That's called in Hebrew a nes. A nes. The Hebrew word for miracle is nes. The Hebrew word for a signal flag is a nes. The idea of a miracle is, hello, try to get your attention, right? You're going down with your eyes looking down to at your shoes, walking ahead down the street, and you're about to bump into the lamppost, and somebody goes, Shmuel, hello, wave a banner, right? It's a miracle. Miracle is there. It's a signal flag to get your attention. And just like these soldiers in World War I, to give you information to change your direction, your strategy. It's a messaging system. The point of a miracle is God is using providence. Providence means God is involved in history. God's involved in our lives at the individual level and at the national level. And the idea of a miracle is God, at this point in history, is communicating. We're going to see in a minute. He's cranking up the volume depending upon what it is. He's got to crank it up from nature, a little bit louder maybe to a hidden miracle, and sometimes to really make his point because people aren't paying attention the way they need to pay attention, the volume will really go up. It'll be an open miracle. Okay, so I want to go into Nachmanides. Nachmanides in the 11th century, one of our greatest commentaries on the Torah, on the Chumash. We mentioned this once before about Noach and his ark. And here's what the Ramban Nachmanides says. He says, Yadua ki achayot bot meod. There were a lot of animals. Everybody knows that. Umihen gedolot meod kepilim. And there were very many big ones like the elephants. Veharemes aromes al aretz, and all the creeping little things, all the mice and rodents and bugs. Rab, tons of them. Gam me'of hashamayim, all those birds. He says there were 120 different species of owls. V'kasher te'asaf kulam, and once Noach gathered all of them together, and he got enough food. Remember, he had to feed them. He had to gather enough food for a year. T'mima, a complete year. Lo tachilotam. It was impossible for the teva, for the ark, this particular ark, and not even 10 of them to contain it. So, however, says Nachmanides, Hunes, it was a miracle. Echzik mu'at et hamruba. It was a miracle that this little boat, was able to contain so much. So wait a second now. We just said it's a nes. It was a nes. In English, it's a miracle. So you go, yippee, miracle. Wait a second. It was a nes. It was a message. It was a signal flag to all of the people around. Hey guys, pay attention. This is a message. This giant boat that Noach is gathering all of these people, all these animals, and they can't contain it, but it's a giant boat. This is trying to get your attention, to get you to get a message. That's what a nes is. God doesn't make miracles stum. Stum means just because. It's a message. All right, let's go back to our Nachmanides. And you might want to say, well, listen, if you're already doing a miracle, God, have Rachmanas on Noach. Here, let's take a look at the picture, right? Anybody been here in Kentucky? This is Noach's Ark replica in Kentucky. Look at these little cars. Look at what Noach had to build in his driveway for all of those years. And it was a miracle that all of the animals, 2 by 2, or 7 of the kosher species, fit in here. And that was supposed to get their attention. So if it's going to be a miracle anyway, here, build something the size of this truck or this car and shove all the animals in there. Why not? You're already doing that. Why not depend on the miracle? So here's what Nachmanides says. Re'eh, Hashem Yitbarach, God had the ark made, Gdolah, so big, Kidei she'yir'u ota b'nei doro. He wanted a huge boat so people would be astonished. Vitmuhuba. Visapru alea. To get people talking. He wanted the whole world talking about this boat. And that they'd start talking about this boat. What do you need a boat for? Because Noah says there's going to be a flood. And then it would start the conversation because it was so astonishing. It was a nest, a banner, an attention getter. They would talk about it. They talk about the flood, and God's hoping if they talk about the flood, and Noah is explaining to them why the flood is going to happen, because all flesh has perverted its ways on the world, in the world. He says they'll maybe decide not to do it, right? Force them? No, we don't want to force them. We want them to use their own free will. But in order to use their free will, sometimes you have to give them information and you have to give them a ness in order to make that choice. Right? And they talk about the knosa be'ema, the chaya of the tocha. And how amazing it was that all the animals were coming in. V'ya'asu teshuva. There's that word that we had from the repentance, sin and repentance. He wanted them to do teshuva, right? Lashuv, to change their ways, to come back to the path that humanity is supposed to be on. So we have the signal flags to say, over here in this direction, right? Switch direction, guys. Do teshuva. Return to the path and aim in the direction you're supposed to be going in. And why did he make it gedolah? God made him make it very big, not only as an attention getter, but lema'et benes, because he wanted to minimize the miracle. Kikach haderech b'chol hanisim shebetorah, because that's the way of every miracle in the Torah or in the books of the prophets. La'asot ma shebiyad adam, la'asot v'hasha'ar yeh b'yedei shamayim. We want as much as possible to be done by human beings. God could do everything. He doesn't need us. He wants us. He wants us to build the world in the way that's good for us, that's going to build the world connecting to God. And he said, and if we need help at some point, he's going to come in. He's the mashgiach, the supervisor. He's the creator, the sustainer, and the supervisor. The supervisor does not sit on the assembly line. We're on the assembly line. We're manufacturing the perfect world. But you need a supervisor to make sure everybody has all the tools and the raw materials they need. And if somebody sort of trips up or faints, right? Stop the assembly line for a minute, get that worker back on track, right? When there's an emergency or a serious problem that maybe everybody's going to get messed up and not be able to accomplish the goal, then the supervisor has to step in, not to do it for them, but to help everybody realize they've gotten off track. All right? So that's what we mean when we say God is the creator of the universe, the sustainer. He means every breath, every molecule, every day, right? Every baby, right? God did not wind up the world and let it go. He did not wind it up. He's the sustainer. He's constantly, you know what it's like? You know why we have these screens that you're all looking at? God created the screen that you're looking at so you would understand this principle. We say that God renews the world every day, every moment, every second, which is exactly that's me on the screen, right? 60 hertz, 50 hertz, 50 times a second. There's little dots going across. It looks like a solid image. This is not a solid image. It's being refreshed 50 or 60 times a second, depending upon where you are in the world. God is constantly refreshing the world. If he pulls the plug, screen goes black. So now that we understand that, we're going to start moving towards answering our question, why did they have miracles during the biblical period, open miracles, and we don't have open miracles today? Right? So what are the conditions we're going to have to require if we don't want to change somebody's mind about believing in God or not believing in God? What are the conditions we're going to require so that when an open miracle happens, that doesn't take place, right? Think about it. Let me ask you a question. Do you think when Moses lifted up his hand and said, the sea's going to split, and then the sea split, did that change any behavior, what Moshe was going to do the next day? You think it changed him? Or he was the same Moshe before, during, and after the open miracle? Okay, you think it did change or he didn't change? He did change. I would claim Moshe got up to talk to God early the day before the miracle. And after the miracle, he probably got up early to talk to God. And if the miracle hadn't happened, I think he would have gotten up early to do his morning prayers and talk to God. People like me, sometimes I had a late night. I got to sleep in. Oh, God will understand. If I'm there and the sea splits, I don't care what time I went to sleep late. I'm up on time for Minyan, for the group prayers, right? Morning prayers. Moses wasn't changed by that miracle happening. Moshe comes into Paro's palace and he throws down his staff and it turns into a snake, right? What would happen if you were there and you saw that happen? What would you do? You'd go, wow, that's awesome. There's a God. I'm going to get up early. I'm going to go make sure I make it to prayers. You know, that cheeseburger I was thinking of happening, I'm not going to have. And then what happens? Paro's magicians come along and they throw down their sticks and they turn into snakes. And what do you say? Hey, the cheeseburger's looking better every day. Right? All of a sudden, there's a balance of free will again, right? You see that? So in order to maintain free will when you're having open miracles or transcending nature, you have to have at one and the same time what we would call black magic, people having the ability to manipulate nature, right? All this astrology stuff, all this idol worship stuff, right? You're going to have idol worshipers be able to pull off a lot of good tricks. Otherwise, if it's only God that's doing these things and he does them, your free choice to ignore God is taken away. Paro, you see, if you read the story carefully, when the times that Paro's heart is hardened, sometimes he hardens it himself. One of the reasons why he's hardening it himself is he's got options. He's got options to explain it away. It was his magicians. It was, was it Moses? We talked about this, right? With the staff and hitting the rock. Was it the staff? Maybe it was the fancy staff that he had, right? So you need to have balance in the world for an open miracle. So you're going to see one and the same. So there's going to be three things. One, you have to have such a commitment to God, such an awareness of God, like Moshe had, to have the miracle happen through somebody like him. We call that a prophet. A prophet who is so at that level, someone who is at that level of commitment and understanding and sees the world that way. He's seeing the world the way God sees the world. That's a prerequisite for prophecy. Prophecy is an emergent property of someone who has developed their character and studied and understand from a wisdom point of view how the world works. Learn Torah. They've studied the Torah, understand how God sees the world, because that's what a Torah is a manifestation of, how God sees the world. It's the instruction guide, how to use the world. So therefore, that's how God sees the world. You build up your character traits to such an extent that you get all of your ego out of the way. You're the most humble person. We talked about this in our Torah from Sinai session. And now all of a sudden, the emergent property is I have clarity of how the world works. And if I really have clarity how the world works, I understand how nature works, and I understand what's going to have to happen for nature to be broken to get the world's attention when they get off track. It's predictable. That's what a prophet is, right? He knows it's going to happen. Prophecy is an emergent property of knowing intellectually all of Torah, seeing the way that God sees the world, and getting your ego out of the way so you're not projecting. In America, just watch the cable news and you'll see one channel projecting themselves onto the story, and you flip the channel, you see another one projecting their ego onto the story, and it's two different worlds, people. Meaning it's as an objective third party without a horse in the race. You watch this, it's incredible to see that happening. If you want to see what's objectively happening for real, how God sees the world, get your ego out of the way. That's the only way you're going to come out with one common vision and appreciation of what's going on in the world. And if you understand God's will, then you're going to understand what's going to happen when the world gets off track. This is Jeremiah. This is Isaiah. It's clear to them. I start learning Torah. I know there's big trouble ahead in America if... Anyways, we'll have a whole separate session about that. Maybe I'll do a walk and talk on that, right? I don't want to get off track too much. So, yes, once you're understanding God's plan, you learn his Torah, you get your ego out of the way, and instead of having the world want to operate the way I want it to operate, which is idol worship, I'm trying to see how it's going to operate according to God's plan. I know God's plan is to have the Jewish people back in the land of Israel and build the temple and have a kingdom that's teaching the world. Right? We know this. So now project that onto annexing the territories. Project that onto the government of Israel. Project that onto what's going on in America. Right? You understand what the end game is. Don't want it to end up nice the way you want it to end up nice. You think God's going to let millions of Jews assimilate themselves out of existence in America? Think about that. You know God doesn't want the Jewish people to disappear. You know he wants them in Israel. How long is he going to allow them to stay in America? Think about it. All right. So, prerequisites for open miracles. We need a prophet because somebody has to be the agent. What's a prophet? What's a miracle? What made the miracle of the splitting of the sea wasn't that the sea split. The miracle, because you could, I've seen people, it was a strong east wind. The tidal flows in the eastern side of the Mediterranean. They have done this with models. You can actually do it if there's a lot of wind coming a whole night. It says it. It's what happened. The miracle is a prophet says it's going to happen. Right? Frogs isn't such a big miracle. Locusts happen all the time. What makes it a miracle is Moses says a month in advance, this is going to happen once every month. And Moses says, Paro, you don't let it, tomorrow, the locusts are coming. And it happens. That's what makes it a miracle. So a prerequisite is a prophet. And you have to have somebody whose free will is not going to be taken away when it happens via the prophet. So you need to have an era of prophecy for an open miracle. We don't have prophets today. No open miracles. So you need a prophet. 2, you need to have the counterbalance in society, right? You need to have the black magic guys. You need to have the sorcerers. We don't have that also. As much as open miracles are foreign to somebody in the 2020, so is somebody doing black magic. So is idol worship. It actually does something. You see that? Okay, I want to tell you a quick story about a cab driver I met, about this idea that it has to happen via a prophet. So, and actually I was in a cab a long time ago, and there was something political going on, and there was some scandal with rabbi. There's always scandals in the left-wing liberal press about rabbis, right? They have an agenda to put down religion. So at any rate, there was a big scandal. Anyways, the cab driver there was talking about what was going on in the headlines. He's saying, people say they're holy, they're holy. He says, you know who was holy? He says, my Safta. She was holy, my Safta. So she was from Iraq. He was an Iraqi Jew, and she'd come from Iraq. They came in the 50s and lived in huts when there was a big aliyah from the African nations, North African. So she was Iraqi. So he was telling this story when he was a little boy in the late 50s, early 60s. And they were living in Ma'abarot. The Ma'abarot, they had to build like tent cities to accommodate, to absorb all these million people that came in such a short amount of time. It was a fledgling little country. There were 600,000 people here in 1948. And in the next few years, a couple million people showed up. Where do you put them, right? So actually down here in Yavniel, right about here, there was like a tent city with Tunisian Jews. Anyways, it was a tent with a dirt floor. And he walked into his Savta's tent, her Ma'abara, and she's like cooking up like a Iraqi stew kind of thing. I don't know what. And he walks in, his little kid standing beside his grandmother. And all of a sudden he looks, and his Savta says, she sees slithering in through the tent door is this Palestinian viper. Palestinian viper are deadly, right? We have these poisonous snakes up here. So it slithers in. And the Savta looks the snake in the eye, and it says, Nachash, snake, we're the Jewish people. God's made a miracle. He brought us back to the land. We are here. I demand you leave my tent right now. You're not going to harm anybody. You are leaving the tent right now. And the snake is like staring her in the eye while she's saying this, turns around and slithers out the door. And the kid's watching this. He says, Shmuel, he says, my Safta, she was a holy lady. So I look over at Uzi, the cab driver. I said, Uzi, I said, he's not wearing a kippah. I said, Uzi, I said, why aren't you wearing a kippah? He's like, he's so into like religion and spirituality and God, that's about kilkeloti, right? The army ruined him, right? Because that was the big absorption of whatever, right? Makes campus life on campus look like the Mickey Mouse Club, right? To go into the army, like party time for 3 years. You have 17, 18, and 19-year-olds being supervised by 20-year-olds and 21-year-olds, right? That's the army. So for 3 years. Any rate, so he said, Shmuel. I said, listen, let me ask you a question, Udi. I said, if you would have looked at that snake and you would have said, snake, leave. I demand that you leave to protect the Jewish people because that's what God wants, and it's left. Would you be wearing a kippah today? Right? I said, Udi, I said, your Savta, she was a holy lady before the snake, during the snake, after the snake, whether the snake left or didn't, she did not change an iota. He says, Shmuel, that's true. He says, but me, Udi, I would have changed. A miracle has to happen via a tzaddik gamor, a person who is totally righteous, meaning it's not going to change their decision about connecting to God. Or, who else can make a miracle happen? A Rasha Gamor, somebody who's totally bad. Whether the miracle happens or not, he's still going to do, party all day, right? Do his own thing. One or the other. That's because we care about free will so much. Okay, let's continue on here. Now, I want to share with you, Rabbi Khan was talking about the Gemara Talmud. This is in the 4th century, the time of the Talmud, Rav Papa and Abaya, in Babylon, in Iraq. And they were discussing the same question, right? They've been separated out from the land of Israel, right? The exile The destruction of the city happened in the year 70. We're in the 9 days now leading up to the commemoration of the destruction of the temple in the year 70. And this is in the year 320, right? So we've been in exile for a while there in Babylon. The Babylonian Talmud is being edited and compiled. So Amar le Rab Papa Labaya, he says, what's different about the earlier generations? He's talking about the biblical period, for whom miracles occurred. And what's different about us, for whom miracles don't occur? This is not a new question that Shmuel Veffer invented in 1985, right? They're asking the same question in the year 325. So Abaya answers him back, Amarle. The previous generations were wholly dedicated to the sanctification of God's name. Well, we are not as dedicated to the sanctification of God's name. It's basically saying what I just said, right? They were so committed, they weren't going to change whether the miracle happened or the miracle didn't happen in the biblical period. Or they had magicians that could counteract the power of the miracle. All right. I just want to share now back here. Let's take a look at this. Hidden miracles are happening all the time. Nature is happening all the time. The only question is, are we listening, right? This is providence, the divine providence. We're not prophets, so God does not speak to us. God does speak to us through revelation, through the Torah. So if you want to hear what God has to say about something, you open up the Torah, you open up the Talmud, you learn to see what God is saying. If you can't figure out what he's saying, then you go to your Rav, you ask a rabbi. If he can't figure it out, ask a rabbi. Okay, so that's how God talks to us. The other way God talks to us is he speaks to us in real time at the individual level and at the national level. And the volume that he speaks to us is commensurate to how open our ears are, how much we're paying attention. Right? Same way we talked about this once, how you're talking to a teenager. The volume increases. You want them to make their own choice. You want them to make their own choice, but sometimes they need some supervision and they need some information and they could be getting themselves into trouble. So sometimes you have to step in to protect them for their own sake. All right. So the hidden miracles and nature is nature, and then the hidden miracles. That's how God talks to us. That's how providence works. God communicates us through Torah, and God communicates to us through history, through events. So at the individual level, I'm going to cross the street, and I never get hit by a car, and I back off. God's talking to me. That's a message. It could be a message if I choose to say, God, speak to me every day. Otherwise, it's just nature, right? Statistics are you don't look both ways. You could get hit by a car. But if I say, God, I'm ready to listen, you can talk to me in whispers, and I'm willing to pay attention, then he will. Then that car can have meaning. Say, God, give me messages along the way, let me try to figure it out. I want to learn this language of nonverbal communication with you, God. And the car could come on and say, oh, wait a second, was I going in the right direction? Where was I headed to? Should I really be going there? Maybe I should go in a different direction. Just got fired. Oh, that's interesting. What's the message in that? Should I change careers? Should I fight for the job? Am I being too lazy? Like, God's talking to me if I invite him to speak to me at the individual level. And it's definitely happening at the national level. Definitely happening at the national level. And, the war, there was two things going on in World War II with my family. One is the national level. It was a miracle. Miracle does not have to be, oh, an amazing thing happened. Look at it, it turned around. Everything worked out great. That's not what miracle is the signal flag, right? Something that's happening in such an irrational, crazy way to grab your attention to say, hey, for the Jewish people, the Holocaust was a miracle. I see it, it was a miracle. Again, miracle doesn't mean good. Miracle means something extraordinary, something that is happening to get the Jewish people's attention in particular. It was a world war to get the world's attention to say, hey, people, what are you doing? Are you fulfilling your role? Are you doing what I created you to do? That's national providence. Now, individuals can get swept up in national providence. Innocents died. I have hundreds of family members and cousins that went to the ovens. There's a bunch of us that survived. Why them and not my father? Right? They were innocent. There's 1.5 million names of children in Yad Vashem at the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. What'd they do wrong to deserve it? Why was that the best thing for them? Well, maybe it wasn't. But if the Holocaust, if the only people who went to the camps and the ovens were rapists and child molesters and drug dealers, what would your conclusion be about the Holocaust? Don't be a rapist or a child molester or a drug dealer. That's who the message was for. By necessity, if you're having a national providence, the nation has to be swept up in it. You appreciate that. Otherwise, it's an individual message and not a national message. How God takes care of that, right? We can have a different session, right? Because God's just, and people getting swept up in something that had nothing to do with them for the sake of the group, right, shouldn't suffer, and they don't suffer for that. We can talk about that one day. Why bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people, good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people. All right, so everybody see that? So we're having things happening at one and the same time, the national and individual providence. All right, I want to finish up, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the Gulf War. And because that was a hidden miracle to get the Jewish people's attention. And everybody was swept up in it. And I remember being in a cab. I used to take a lot of cabs back in those days when I lived in Jerusalem because I didn't own a car. So I'm in another cab. And actually, I was on the way to the printing press to print up the book, Mrs. Massive Miracles. And the cab driver says, where are you going? So I tell him, I wrote this book about the Gulf War. And we're printing it up. It was very shortly after the war. I wrote it during the war. It was written as it was happening. As I heard the stories about the miracles, I was writing them down. At any rate, he says, I wrote a book about the Gulf War. What's to write about? We spent 6 weeks. We didn't fight. Nobody got called up. We sat in our houses. Missiles fell. Nobody got hurt. What's to write about? It was like a war that was a non-war. It was the first war that I remember I got called up to go to do my reserve duty on the Gaza border. And I had 5 kids. My 5th son was just born. He was 2 weeks old. And they called me up from my headquarters to go down to the Gaza border. Everything was shut down during those 6 weeks, right? You sit on a Jeep and, have a beer and roast some potatoes with the guys. That's what it would have been. Meantime, there were missiles falling. You had 30 seconds to get 5 kids all out of bed into the sealed room, close the door, put the gas mask on. So I said to my Pikida, my Tzina Kesher, the person calling me up, the girl. So the 19-year-old girls run the army, by the way. So she says to me, you got to come up. I said, listen, the war's going on here in my apartment. We got 5 little kids under the age of 6. We haven't got enough time. I said, I'll tell you what, you send a soldier over to help my wife, and I'll go sit on the Gaza border and drink some beer with the boys and coffee. She says, let me call you back. So she calls me back 15 minutes later. She says, you know what? You're right. Stay home. It's like only in Israel. Only in Israel. The soldiers said called to stay home because there's a war on, right? In America, there were people who were in the reserves, 2 parents got called up during the Iraq War. Remember that? They'd have a 2-year-old kid, and both parents got called up. They said, who's going to take care of our kid? They said, you should have thought of that before you signed up. I remember hearing that story. Anyway, so the Udi says, what's the point of writing the book? So I said, Udi, I said, I remember when the sirens would go off, you'd all go into the room and you'd have to know if a missile landed, you heard a thump, you have to know, can I come out, right? Where's the all clear? So there would be another siren and they would call out on the radio which areas could actually come out of your sealed room. It was safe to come out. And there was like this 20-minute period where we'd all be glued to the radios to hear, is it okay to, right? And there was one station, all the stations were broadcasting the same message. So imagine you have the entire country all listening to the radio for 20 minutes, everybody listening. So remember during one siren, they put Prime Minister Shamir on and we're listening. And he gets on, this little Zaidi, little grandfather, right? Here he is here. I'll show you a picture of him in a minute. So he gets on the radio and he says, I'm happy to speak to all the people of Israel, the nation of Israel. And I'm sitting here in my sealed room, like each and every one of you, just like everybody else, here with my family, waiting for the siren to go by. And he said, we have thousands of years of history, and we've been through a lot. And Gam Ze Yavor, this too shall pass. He says, at this very moment, knowing that the entire people of Israel are listening to me, the Jewish people, we're all in this together, I feel the achdut, I feel the unity of our people and the strength that we have in the unity of our people. And I turned to Uzi and he says, yeah, Shmuel, I felt that. He said, during the war, if there was a soldier or somebody needed a ride, you didn't matter, religious, not religious, whoever they were, you picked them up, you helped them at random acts of kindness. People were helping each other, all unified. I said, Udi, I said, when was the last time before that you felt that? He said, 73, the Yom Kippur War. Right? The Yom Kippur War, 5 armies attacked us. We almost died. Everybody was together. All the arguments, the pettiness went away. So when was the time before that? He said, the 67 war, the 6-day war. We were all united, felt like one. And he turned to me and he said, Shmuel, isn't it a shame we need a war to get the Jewish people to unite? And I said, Udi, isn't it a shame we need a war to get the Jewish people together? Why don't we get the Jewish people together and then we won't need a war? Right? That's the message of Tisha B'Av. That's what's coming up now, right? The temple is destroyed. The Twin Towers were destroyed, united, right? Everybody united in America until they forgot a few weeks later. Right? Why are we inviting it? Learn the message. Hear the message. Learn it. Say, God, speak to me in whispers. I'm willing to listen. You don't have to yell. Speak to me in a whisper. Why is that happening? Okay. All right. I just want to show you this picture. We're finished. All right. This is actually a picture of Prime Minister Shamir. I think it was shortly after the Gulf War. And this is his assistant. And this is Rabbi Uri Zohar. Uri Zohar at the time was the top comedian, the top television personality, the top producer, the top director, stand-up. He was like, Seinfeld, Johnny Carson, everything all wrapped up into one. And he actually became religious. He did tshuva. So he was like one of the most famous personalities. This is him here, Prime Minister Shamir. And this is me. This is my friend, Rabbi Tom Meyer. And we went to Prime Minister Shamir. And we said, listen, the Jewish people are assimilating out of existence in America. Israel is strong now. And it's just like we sent people to Entebbe to rescue Jews because their physical lives were in danger. We have millions of Jews whose spiritual lives are in danger. And it's up to this. We're doing it as an organization, but there's only so much we can do. There's other people trying, but we need to have an umbrella. We need somebody to direct it. This is a national challenge that requires a national response. And he agreed. And he said, you know what? You're right. We're going to do it. And they were about to set up the whole thing. And that's when the Madrid conference happened and everybody turned against him and he had a crisis in the government and it didn't happen in the end. But we need a miracle for that one. But we don't want the miracle. We were trying to preempt it. We were trying to reach out to the Jewish people and teach them who they are so that they'll make their own free choices and become the people who we're supposed to be, as opposed to being somebody else, right? There's a lot of Jewish people in America today being somebody else other than the Jewish people who they're supposed to be. And we don't want to have a miracle to wake them up and bring them all back home. All right. So that's what I wanted to say about miracles. There's a lot to say. And maybe at some point we'll have a session on providence, or we'll go deep dive in providence a little bit more and about why bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people. But thank you for all of your attention. And you're all great. And so everybody have a great week. And thank you very much. Have a great day.